about something we're not covering 6,000 years. We're going to cover about a millennium. And I say that without being tongue-in-cheek. Because as we go through this, one of the things we're going to realize is that dating of this book is beyond impossible, or the first 11 chapters. And really, the dating is not as important as we like to make it out to be. So, but what I'm going to do is start out with just some geography and kind of laying some foundation. One of the things that I have up here is a time chart of history of the world. And I've only got it open to about the first millennium. No, got it open to about 2 millenniums. It goes a whole lot further. And Jim, just to let you know, this actually goes through Bush 2. That's where it is. So, this was given to me as a gift from a man in a Bible study that I did when I was down in Gulfport, Mississippi. So that tells you that's been, Lisa, that was 10 years ago. It's been a while. All right. So so this is what we're covering is Genesis 1 through 11. Do this to me. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is this is a map of the ancient world as we understand it. And you'll notice that that there are some modern day markings like where Turkey is, but that was the Hittites. You've got over here Armenia, Azerbaijan, Iran, which is Persia, Babylon, Sumer, Elam. I want you to see this because that really what we're talking about is a very narrowly defined piece of geography. And in fact, if we look even closer, we're going to be looking at an area that's even tighter in that sense. You're going to probably ask me, why in the world did you choose a map that shows Eden this far north? Because a lot of people talk about Eden being down here. Read the scriptures. When it talks about the rivers, it says, and the rivers flowed from the Garden of Eden. One problem. Rivers don't typically flow south to north. They flow north to south. If you put it down here, it's too far down. They don't go that way. They go this way. So we have to think about the Garden of Eden being a little bit further north than what a lot of people like to think about. We'll get into that a little more. I also want to show you this because of where Mount Ararat is. And if you look, and you'll probably see it a little bit better on your map, but you'll notice that Mount Ararat is right there almost on the border of Armenia. Now, let me put this into context. Down here, you have the Tigris and the Euphrates. Again, we're looking at a very narrow section of geography when we talk about the first 11 chapters. You're going to hear me refer to the Gilgamesh epic throughout this. The Gilgamesh epic was a story that was a Babylonian story that parallels much of the Old Testament, or the first 11 chapters. And Gilgamesh was part of, or talks about the great, what they refer to as the Great Deluge. His boat ended up down here on what was called Mount Nisr, which would be somewhere right around Ebro and Mosul, about a 400-mile difference. Okay? So you've got a Babylonian text that's actually older than the writings of Genesis, but has very similar parallels. And in fact, the Gilgamesh epic even talks about things like paradise. It uses the Sumerian word for paradise, where not Gilgamesh, but another character whose name I will not even begin to try to pronounce, finds a particular flower that if he consumes this flower, he will receive eternal life. He thinks, hey, this is cool, I'm going to go swimming first. You know, well, while he's taking a swim, a bird comes along, swallows up the flower, and he is deprived of eternal life. Think about the parallel within the Genesis account. Okay? This is important because when we understand these concepts, and again, you don't have this, I just threw this in for kind of good measure. I was looking around today. This is actually a picture taken from Mount Ararat. If you go to Google Maps, you can look this up. And they believe that this particular area is what remains of Noah's Ark. I'm not going to tell you that that's true. I don't know. I don't have time to get into all the biblical archaeology on this, but I just thought it was kind of fascinating, so throw it in there. Now, what we need to understand as we go into the studies of this is the emphasis on Genesis is about beginnings, because Genesis, oh, by the way, means beginnings. Okay? And Genesis 1 through 11 provides the foundation for the rest of the Bible. It's like trying to read a novel without reading the first chapter. It may make sense. You can probably capture most everything, but you'll always feel like something was left out. Excuse me. So Genesis is really about looking at these beginnings. The focus is on God as creator. And that's incredibly important as we think about this, that God is the central focus in this, and it's about creator. It is also about how he deals with his creation. It's about timelines in Genesis is about framework. And we're going to talk about that more in a little bit detail. The editors were not interested in the details about creation or time. We've got to get past that. We have to understand that the editors, when they were composing this, they were thinking about where did we begin from? What is it that makes sense of this? Children do this. Children will ask you about things that you did when you were a child. But you don't tell them about, well, let's see. It all started on February 13th, 1964, when I was born, and they don't care about that. That's not their interest. They're asking you a specific question about something that you did. And we have to think about that in this particular reference. Creation stories of other cultures, like the Babylonians and the Sumerians, indicate a desire to understand humanity as its beginning. The Bible is not the only story that talks about beginnings. However, in my little handy-dandy reference map up here, and by the way, I'm going to leave this unfolded afterwards so you can come take a look. And this is not a chart that's based on, that was published by a biblical group, but they begin with Adam and Eve all the way over here. Now, they list a dating of about 4004 BC. The danger with that is what we're going to talk about here in a moment, about how time, our concept of time and the concept of time back then were different. All right, so now let's talk about this. Genesis 1 through 11. when we come to the very first passages, in the beginning, Now, I want you to really think about that for a moment. I want you to try to picture yourself back around 700 BC. We don't have any modern astronomy. We have no real knowledge of how stars, sun, moon, earth revolve around the sun. We have no concept of what real time is about, i.e., what does a 24-hour day actually mean? So when the writer says, in the beginning, it's a very powerful statement right there. Because their understanding of time was very much different from ours. Remember that our concepts of time have changed several different times. The last time was when Benjamin Franklin was a man, back in the 1700s. They updated time. They actually updated the calendar.
Gregorian calendar.
Now the Gregorian calendar, they updated the Gregorian calendar, which stretches all the way back to Gregory the 13th don't stretch me that far yet.
Way before my time.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that's important to recognize is that if you look at the ancient Sumerian king list, compiled around the third millennium BC, look how long these rulers were going. 30,000 years. Okay, first question is, what was a year to them? Okay? I mean, what was a year?
They have distinct seasons there like we have.
They have seasons.
But not as,
But how did they understand those seasons?
that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. You have 8 rulers in Samaria who ruled 30,000 years each, so 241,200 years. That's pretty darn good. You have the Babylonians coming in 10 years. I guess they were trying to outdo the Sumerians. Their guys ruled 43,200 years. Now, why do I talk about this concept of time and the problem with it? Let's go to the Bible. What a crazy idea. This is verse 3 of chapter 1. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and He separated light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. There was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Simple enough. How do we begin time for a day? Morning, not evening. Here's the other problem. Let's go over to day 4. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day. Who sees the problem?
You don't have a day or night till the 4th day.
We got light and darkness, but we don't have sun and moon until the 4th day. Okay, this is where you start scratching your head on this one. Now, if our idea of concept of time is based upon sun and moon, and there is not sun and moon until the 4th day, come on. I'm starting to see some light bulbs going off going, how do they calculate time? There's the question.
It doesn't have any frame of reference.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a problem because we don't know how they mark time.
But understand something, and I love this. I think this is such a great quote. Time is a property of the universe that God created, and that time did not exist before the beginning of the universe.
Augustine.
Why are we trying to tell God how long it took him to do something?
Now, think about that for a moment.
The writers are using time as a frame of reference for who? For us. The writer could have easily said, God created. And we should be going, oh, duh. By the way, you can tell a 2-year-old that, and they go, cool. Tell an adult that, and they're like, really? Well, you know, Einstein had a theory on this, and Darwin backed it up with, y'all will find this out. It's so cool. You can tell them anything. They're just like, ooh, cool. And then they'll go to school and they get brunt. Sorry. I'm in trouble now. But my point is this. We have to think about the fact that the time references are only for our benefit. We don't know how long it took God to do anything. In fact, the Psalms actually says, to God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. In other words, God is not confined by time. Think about that. We worry about time because we are a fixed entity. We're born and we're going to die. That's our time records. That's what we live by. God isn't. All right. And y'all think we're going to get through this. Now, let's move on. By the way, when Jim said I'm giving the 30,000 foot view of this, he is absolutely correct. Everything I've said so far is like weeks of studies at seminary. I took one class on Genesis that focused just on the first 11 books of the Bible. The 12 weeks or 16 weeks? 16 weeks. 3 hours of class a week for 16 weeks just on the first 11 books. That's as far as we got. So I am giving you the 30,000 view moving at Mach 1. All right, so we know that the Genesis dating has been hotly debated. It is generally agreed that Moses was not the writer. Now, I say that, and I want to touch on something Jim said last week, and that I believe will be covered at the end of this, Jim.
Maybe.
Maybe. All right. Written history is not as old as you think it is. Oral history goes back all the way to Adam and Eve.
And that can change from one generation to the next.
Have you ever seen the movie The Book of Eli? Okay. Great movie. If you don't know what the movie is, it stars Denzel Washington. And he is America is in ruins. It's a desert land except for one area that's all green and everything. And Eli is trying to get there. And he is carrying a book. Except the problem is the book he's carrying is empty. It's all up here. And you don't know that until the end of the movie. And I know I'm blowing it for you, but it's a great movie. You got to watch it. And the end of the movie is when he's sitting there and he goes, Genesis, a book by Moses, verse 1. In the beginning, God was creating the heavens and the earth. And he just keeps going. He's memorized the entire Bible, verse by verse. And that is what he is having to get to these other people, is the Bible. Now, oral tradition, and it's important you understand this, oral tradition was not something we sit around
And, you know, about the one-armed fisherman that caught a fish this big. Okay? Oral tradition was something that was valued. Not everybody got to be the historian. The person who got to be the historian had to memorize these stories word for word. I mean, it was an honor to be that person. So when these stories are carried forward, then, you know, at some point, they begin to get written down. Okay? We don't actually know a lot of when some of that happens. But what we do know is this: they were very faithful in how they carried these. Okay? So that's why I say to know who the actual author is, the one who actually put it on paper, I don't really know. Did Moses transmit stories? Absolutely. I'm sure Adam and Eve transmitted stories to Cain, who transmitted stories, and so forth. All right. So that's why it's impossible to know the date. We've already talked about that. I'm not going to get into this. Jim mentioned it a little bit. The editors is known JEPD. The J is for Jehovah. It's actually called Yahweh. Yahweh Elohim, priestly, and Deuteronomy. Chapter 1 of Genesis is commonly referred to, is written by the Yahwehs. Chapter 2 is commonly referred to as being put together by the Elohists. That's as far as I'm going to go with that. That is like 2 weeks worth of study right there, just going into all that. The purpose of this is when you read these passages, especially in the first 11, you will see repeats of things. Genesis 1, you read it, God spoke. But if you go into Genesis 2 and you read, it lays out differently. Okay? So that's why you have to understand that there were different groups who were compiling this material to form this story. They were bringing it from different viewpoints. All right. It is commonly held that the compilation, or when a lot of this came together, was during the Babylonian exile. Again, this is important to recognize because the Jews are in Babylon. You know, there is a fear that they will lose not only their identity but the stories, the foundation of their beliefs. And so it's believed that a lot of the things, if it wasn't written down, it started getting written down. If it was already written, they were starting to say, "Hey, we need to get this put together so that the next generation will know the stories." All right. Now, as we get into the idea of creation a little bit further, I like this. I like these two quotes by Karl Barth, who was a Swiss theologian. He wrote a massive work called The Church Dogmatics. I've been heavily influenced by Karl Barth. I'll just tell you that. I like a lot. In fact, I own the entire set, and I've read a lot of it. Barth is very much a theologian that looks at the action of God in everything. And so these two ideas of libera actio Dei, the free action of God or divine will, and revelation, God revealing himself, really speaks to this idea of what creation is about. Because it is a story about what God is doing, but it also gives us a glimpse and an understanding of God himself. God creates. Let's think about that for a moment. God doesn't need anybody else. But yet, God creates. God chose. And so, I think that is important because it helps us to see that God wants to be a part of his creation. He wants to be a part of who we are. Now, there are three primary topics as we look at this, and again, I am not going into serious detail on any of these. It's going to feel like I have rushed through this as we go through it, and in fact, I am rushing through it because we could spend a Wednesday on each of these topics, just by themselves. But we have beginnings, creation, relationship, covenant, and fall redemption. And these are really the three main themes that we see in Revelation or in Genesis. But we have to understand that there's a lot of things surrounding that. And as I'm going to show in just a moment, just like the fall redemption. If I said fall redemption, most of us would think the garden. But yet I'm going to show you that there are actually 4 stories in these first 11 chapters that look at fall, the fall of man. And so we're going to see how God continues to be involved in all of this. All right, beginnings. We just need to simply recognize that God's creator. Okay? To me, this is not one of those things that's open for debate. Now, I'm going to kind of stretch out on this one just a little bit, just because I like doing it. But there is nothing in the stories that speak, other than it says God created, on how God chose to make it happen. God spoke, it came. God touched, it happened. But there's nothing beyond that that says God spoke and what specifically took place. And that's okay. While we need to accept that, we need to also understand that science is not the enemy of religion. Science helps us to understand certain things. Now, maybe their interpretation isn't always right. But at the same time, and this is where I'll kind of step on something, I was having this discussion years ago in college, and somebody said, well, you know, being a Christian, you probably don't believe in the Big Bang Theory. And I said, why not? They just kind of stuck back and said, how can you believe in that? I said, I don't know how God did it. If God said, well, you know what, I'm going to take these 2 atoms right here, and I'm going to pound them together and see what happens, who am I to say He did it? And they floored them. I said, but you got to remember one thing. It was Einstein who said, religion without science is empty, or is illiterate. Science without religion is empty. Now, I paraphrase that a little bit, but you get the point. But again, the writers weren't concerned about that because they didn't know that. The writers didn't know what an atom was. They didn't know what a molecule was. They didn't know what DNA was. So how could they write about what they did not know? Yet what they're talking about here is that God created. The other part to this is even more important. In Babylon, like so many of the other ancient worlds, they had polytheism, which meant there were all these other gods. You know, we've studied this, you know, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, all this wonderful stuff. For the Hebrews, for the Israelites, to suddenly stop or to suddenly start talking about a monotheistic God. God created the water. God created the light. God created the vegetables. God created the dirt. God created, you know. This was not something that they were prepared to think about. For them, you got Apollos and the sun. And then you got, and Lisa hates when I do this because I always mix my Greek and my Roman mythologies up. You got Athena who's doing love and war. You got Poseidon who's doing the ocean. You know, all the others. The pantheon. No one God could create everything. But here, you've got God as one. And that's why that is so important. It's also understandable, it's also important to realize then that where the ancients always talked about their gods being fallible, they were capricious, they were weak deities of the ancient world. God is omnipotent, He's omniscient, and He's omnipresent. We're talking about a very strong, powerful, loving God. Man is His creation. Okay? Again, central to the divine plan. God creates everything and then creates man. Okay? He creates so that we can exist. Can you imagine putting man on the earth and then go, oh, well, oh yeah, this guy's got to eat at some point. I guess I better think about that. It's a well laid out plan. I think this last part is probably the most important that we're going to talk about, and that is that it's a relationship. It's a relationship. Because God is about relationships. And what we are seeing here is God being involved, not just creating, but He's involved with it. He doesn't set His creation, creates it, sets it down, and says, okay, good luck, I'll be over here. He doesn't do that. And we see this from the moment He creates until we get to Revelations and even to today, that God is still involved. And that part right there, we're going to talk a little bit at the end, because it's something that's important for today, in this time frame. Now, you've already heard me say Psalms 90, verse 4, about the 7 days and what is time. Here's the other part to this creation which I want you to think about. We typically think that God created Adam and Eve, and then when they get kicked out of the garden, God kind of takes Adam and Eve to the side and says, look, sex education, 101, you guys still have a responsibility to procreate. Here's how you do it. And then they have a child, Abel, then they have a child, Cain. Cain gets in trouble. He's the second son. Anyway, Lisa, be quiet. And Cain goes off and he finds his wife.
Where'd they come from?
Isn't that an interesting question? Here's the other question that we often forget about. Cain, when he's having this discussion with God about, his misdeeds, and he's concerned about his life, he says something very interesting. Cain said to the Lord, this is chapter 4, verse 13. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth. And whoever finds me will kill me. Oops. That means there's the presence of other people. He goes finds a wife. Now, I remember one dear old pastor, decades ago, who I heard, I didn't believe it then, still don't believe it now, that said that actually what happened was Cain went and married his sister that wasn't mentioned in the birth narratives. How'd you guess? Well, that's right, you and I are from the mountains. Here again, we limit God. Yes, we are told about the creation of Adam and Eve, and we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But why do we believe that God couldn't create just because it's not written down?
I guess it sort of means maybe everything that happened was not recorded. What we have is a recorded or a record of what did happen that we know about. So who's to say there's not other things that didn't happen that we didn't write down? I mean, that's...
Yeah. And Tish, you're right. We have a very limited amount of understanding. And let's get into this, because when it says that He created Adam, the Hebrew word is Adam. Now, we translated it Adam. But the word actually means man or mankind. We hold it to be in one person, and trust me, I have no trouble with that. That does not bother me. But I think we also have to quit limiting God by our own limitations. God created. Now, I'm not saying that there were a lot more people hanging around the garden than just Adam and Eve. But what I am saying is that just because we don't know what else God was doing, doesn't mean it wasn't being done.
Sounds like some of the stories I heard when I was teaching school. I mean, I knew about some of the things that happened. There's a lot more going on I didn't know about, but that doesn't mean it didn't exist.
Yeah.
A lot of things.
Yeah, and I mean, there's, I'm trying to find you a story, but I can't, the two I just thought about, I'm not allowed to talk about.
It sounds good, go ahead.
No,
Lisa, don't encourage that.
Lisa, you're right, Lisa
Don't
will get
encourage
you.
that.
I still hold a security clearance, thank you very much.
Over here.
But anyway, so we've got to recognize that, again, we're reading this, but we have to be careful about our own limitations, because that's what we're talking about. Now, this is interesting. We know that a woman is created. A woman. Don't get mad at me yet. You got a look coming over like. And she is only known as woman. Throughout the garden story, she is just woman. And the Hebrew word is Shah. Now, I'm going to be the first to tell you, oh, by the way, Ishwa means woman, wife, or female. I don't know how we translated that into Eve. I couldn't find that one. Even when I looked up the word Eve, it didn't even come close. I don't know where we got that one from. But what's important here is to recognize that when we're talking about this creation story, there's two levels to it. There is the idea that God created man and woman. Okay, that's the first part. But that God is also creating people. That's the bigger part.
Well, when he created the universe, he created all these stars and everything else. Why can't he do what you say?
Exactly. And Jim, this is an interesting point that I think that I like. I wish I could remember who wrote this book that I read many years ago. But it was a really well done book by a physicist who's a very devout Christian. And he said, we are constantly discovering the universe. He said, he looks at that and he goes, I'm always amazed about the fact that we're still discovering God. And that's what he related to, that the more we discover the universe, the more we're discovering God, because now we're starting to see how vast God is. And if God can create all of this that we don't even understand, what is it for him to create a few more people? To me, the beauty of this is that we begin to recognize that in the creation story, God's busy. God is really busy doing a lot of stuff. But he's not just doing it haphazardly. He's doing it to build relationship. And when we look at relationship, look at, I apologize that I'm going to fly through this part very fast, but that in the creation of this, we are looking at how God is just so involved in the interactions of, he walks with Adam and Eve in the cool of the evening. I mean, think about that for a moment. Can you imagine having a date with God? And he just, y'all are just kind of walking and just having a chat. Is that not cool? And that's why I still love the old hymn that talks about in the garden. It's a great hymn. When he kicks them out of the garden, he says, guys, the fig leaves really? Let me make you some clothes. He's mad at them. He's going to take them out of paradise, get them away from the tree of eternal life. But he's going to give them coverings. Not just fig leaves, but coverings. He's mad at the world or his creation. He's like, you know what, I'm going to just get rid of it and start this thing over again. But yet he looks at Noah and goes, you know what, I like him. I don't have to start all over again. I can keep him, his family, we'll be okay. See, that talks about a God that is intimate with his creation. You know, as he's creating, he's looking at Adam going, wow, Adam, I've got to find somebody for you. And yes, we know the old joke, a man cannot live out without a woman. It just proves it. I like the other one that I saw. God created man, but then don't we always start with a rough draft before we get to the final? I thought that was pretty good. Got a button right there. Okay. If I get too far off, at least I get you back on track. All right. Now, something else about this that I think is important. When we look at Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, God speaks, everything comes into being. Yet, in the Genesis 2 passage, when it talks about creating man, it says God touched. He speaks and everything else comes to existence. But he comes to man and he touched. It says he formed man from the earth, from the earth. He touched it. Then he does something else, and I think this part is the coolest. I forgot to put these in your notes. Write the word ruach. R-U-A-C-H. R-U-A-C-H. Hebrew word. Ruach. I wish I had that ability to get that roll in there. Ruach. Jim, who do you have for the Old Testament?
John D.W. Watts at 8 a.m.
Oh, I bet he could spit that out.
No, he didn't.
What a way to start your day, huh?
Not a way to start.
Oh, you said with one of the masters. The word of ruach means breath or spirit. God breathed into man his spirit, his ruach. Nothing, not in any other part of creation, not the animals, not fish, birds, anything else. Only into man does he touch and then breathe into him. That is about that relationship. And that is the formation of covenant. And covenant is something that we think about. We actually believe that covenant, we always go back to Genesis 12 with Abram as the covenant. That we always think that's where covenant starts, but it's not. Covenant is part of creation. Man is very special. And I'm using man, just humanity. Humanity is special because God forms and then God breathes. And then he does something else. He says, now, this is yours. Take care of it. That's a covenant. In Genesis 9, after the flood, when Noah comes off the ark, God makes a covenant with Noah. And again tells him to take care of the earth. And then what else does he say? Never again will I destroy the world by water. Today, we may doubt that. But it is that God is making that covenant. Now, this is just on the aside. I just thought it was interesting. I'm just going to put it to the aside. In the Adam and Eve story, God says you can eat of any of the plants. Now, we know there are animals. He says there are animals, but he says you can eat of any of the trees. In the Noah story, when it talks about subduing the earth, it's the first time that there is a reference to eating meat. I'm not sure why, the different authors that I read, nobody really gave could give a real explanation other than that aside was there. But it's just one of those things that, I'll leave that to you to read. Now, I'm fast running out of time. And I've only got 40 more slides. Fall redemption. This one's tough for a couple reasons. Who is the serpent? Understand that in the ancient worlds like Babylon, Samaria, snakes represented a lot of different things. Lisa always hates this one when I say that oftentimes they represented wisdom. I don't know why they use snakes for wisdom. But snakes had that kind of that, lack of a better word, a mythological effect. The word is serpent in the Hebrew. It doesn't actually say snake. What you're seeing in that slide are just some of the discussions of who the serpent represented. Was it Satan? Was it a symbolic representation? Was it something that was pulled out of mythology that the writers used? Was it that the serpent actually was more clever? Why do we have this serpent? The other question that is there that makes it a problem is also this idea of what's called theodicy, the problem of evil. Why does evil exist? This is all I'm going to say on that. That is at least what, Jim, 6 weeks. But I mention that because this is part of that whole fall concept that we've got to understand. The fall is about separation from God. It is free will. That's what I want you to really get from this. Free will was something God had to put into us. Now, yeah, choice. Thank you. You know, I look at the babies right now. Little Autumn Rose is back there all snuggled up. That's not really a choice right now. She's just really comfortable. By the way, she just got a bottle. Your children right now are going to love you. But there is going to come a day when you're wondering if they really do love you.
Shut up, Mom.
Okay. And just remember, they will move back in.
Amen.
Yeah. That's right, thank you. So, it is choice. And it's important for us to understand that because if we're going to love God, if we're going to have that relationship with God, we have to choose to do that. God does not force that on us. And for me, what the whole scene there, and what we're going to talk about real fast, in all 4 scenes of the fall, there is a choice that is being made. It's not just something that, da-da-da. Well, the snake said I should do it, so I did it. Duh. It's not that. Eve knew. Adam knew. Adam was right there. They knew. They made a choice. Whether the snake was inserted into the story as just a way of saying, they were tempted, or whether there was, in fact, a character there that they defined as a snake, but that really was, kind of acting as a tempter. The fact of the matter is that God knew that He had to give us that ability to make a choice, which is why redemption falls in there. If a child disobeys, there's redemption. It's the hope so. The kid, you confront the kid, or in my case, sometimes I already knew what I did, but there was redemption, there was forgiveness. That's why we say that Christ was not an afterthought in creation. Christ was always part of creation. In the beginning was, there we go back to that idea of in the beginning. All right. So the 4 fall scenes: Garden of Eden, Cain kills Abel, Great Flood, and Tower of Babel. Redemption. God assists in the transition. He doesn't just kick them out of the garden and say, well, y'all know everything, good luck, God bless. God sees the righteousness of Noah and says, I'm going to save you and your family. I'm going to tell you to build something you don't even know what it does or what to do with it because it's going to rain. Yeah, I know. You don't know what rain is either. Trust me, it's not going to be pretty. And then Genesis 11:8, the Tower of Babel.
So Craig,
Yeah.
didn't God say that if you eat this fruit, you'll die? But they didn't.
Right. But they died of sin.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. I am way over time. How many of y'all feel absolutely frustrated by what we talked about already? Good, just being honest. How many of you got more questions than you got answers? Okay, I got a couple honest people in here. Final thoughts though. The creation story provides a framework of God's saving grace. It's what we see from the beginning. The editors were not focused on the burning questions that we focus on today. They didn't care about how God created. They just said God created. That was enough. Remember the old bumper sticker, God said it, I believed it, that settles it? It really should read, God said it, that settles it. Whether I believe it or not, it's immaterial. But they weren't worried about those kinds of questions. To them, it was just all important to say God created. Introduces the two main subjects of Holy Scripture. God the Creator, man his creation, his creature. This last part, I think, is even more important. Genesis 1 through 11 is not in dispute with science, the focus on the relationship of God and his creation. I think that for today, for a lot of people today, we need to get back to these two things. We need to quit trying to debate science and start focusing on the fact that God cares about people today. He created us, he still cares about us. We make mistakes, he forgives us. We fall down, he picks us up. We got to get back to that. And that's still part of creation. I can't define time. It's not my purpose here. But I dare argue that we are still experiencing creation because of how God is working in our own lives. New every day. I am way out of time. Any questions?